Let's take a look at the different aspects I look for when we talk about backpacking saws. For this discussion video, guys, what I want to look at is the Bahco Laplander and the Sawvivor. Now the Sawvivor, just to let you know off the bat here, they don't make this anymore. You can find these on the aftermarket or in the aftermarket. However, I hear mixed reports on these, and a lot of it has to do with how they're constructed and how well they hold together. Now, I've been using mine a lot, and I haven't had any problems with it. That said, you might be rolling the dice if you get one aftermarket. But what I want to focus on specifically are a couple of aspects that I want to draw your attention to of what I focus when I'm looking for a backpacking saw. And backpacking, what's one of the biggest things there? Weight, right? The first thing I look at is weight. How heavy is that saw? Is it an acceptable weight that I'm going to take backpacking? Second thing I look at is how small does it fold down so I can pack it? Well, both of these fold down pretty small. I'll roll on some other footage of this Sawvivor of how small that goes down. But here's the Bahco Laplander, and you can see how small that is when it's folded up. Now, a question you want to ask yourself before you buy a saw is, what are you going to be doing with it? Are you going to be processing firewood most of the time, or are you going to be using it more in a type of bushcraft sense? And here's what I mean. If you look at the blades on these two, very, very different teeth, right? The bottom, the Sawvivor, is going to be a much more aggressive cutter than the Bahco Laplander. So you're going to be able to tear through a lot more wood a lot easier with this guy here as opposed to this guy. So that's going to be an advantage for this. Now, that being said, sometimes some of the bushcraft activities and a lot of those things, you just don't need this aggressive teeth. And that's where these smaller teeth come in, and they're much easier to use and friendlier to use in some of those aspects. Some of those things might include if you're making traps. You can do it with this saw, don't get me wrong, but it is nice, in my opinion, to have something like this. If you're going to be cutting small notches instead of using your knife, if you're going to be using mostly your saw, I would definitely use something like this where it has a finer set of teeth. So just as a quick demonstration here, we'll start off with this log, and I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 inches in diameter. Well, maybe it's a little bit larger than that in diameter. But I'm going to cut this down. We'll first use the Laplander with the finer type teeth, and then we'll move on to the Sawvivor, and you can just kind of see the difference. In this case, the span of the blade isn't an issue. All right, not bad, not that long at all. But now, let's move on to the Sawvivor. I can already tell this is a huge difference. Okay, that kind of illustrates the difference between these two. Should be fairly obvious, but those are some of the things you want to look for. Again, moving back to that question, what are you mainly going to be using that saw for? Another aspect to look for is the span of your saw. So you can see the Bahco is going to be about, well, maybe it's a little over half of the Sawvivor. So again, this really isn't designed for processing large amounts of wood. You're going to be using this Laplander for much smaller type of sawing activities than you would this. I see this as more of wood processing. I see this more of your cutting notches or cutting, smaller branches, such as what this is sitting on. Now let's say you were making some sort of trap and you wanted to create a notch, and this is obviously you can see this is a much smaller diameter piece of stick here. And to create a stop cut, using this little Laplander is going to be a lot easier. So stop cut, okay, there's my stop cut. Now what I'm going to do with this stop cut is going to take a blade, and then you can kind of chip away at the wood, and you've created a notch right here. That said, using the Sawvivor, again, it can be done. And it's okay, but in some cases those aggressive teeth, and two, depending on the type of wood you have, just aren't as good to use. In this case, actually, it didn't work too bad. I won't go any further, but you get the point. I can make a notch there. Another aspect is if you want to create a notch just simply with your saw only, there's that notch. Now, if I'm going to do that same thing, we'll do it up top here. Now, if I'm going to use the saw only, there's my stop cut. Not too bad. Going this way is not going to be as nice, but you can see you can still do it. And there's a notch. So it can be done with these aggressive teeth, no doubt in my mind, but it is nicer to be able to do it with the smaller type teeth. Now again, what is your main purpose for your saw? You might argue that this one is going to have more capability. It's got a wider span. You can perform some of the functions that the smaller saw will, albeit with a little more effort. But in sawing the larger diameter logs, of course, this is going to be a lot less effort. One thing in just these two cases, in putting these together, this one, the Laplander, is so much easier in that, much like a folding blade, all it does is pivots, it's closed and open. That aspect of this alone really, really makes it nice. This is a little bit more labor intensive to set up. Not that it's hard, but when you're comparing the two, quick and easy setup and takedown, this wins hands down. Now, as I just discussed, is this one hard to take down and set up? No. But when you talk about a comparison on these things, I'll give you an example. So here's this one. Done. And here's this one. Again, this is just a comparison of these two. This video is meant for you to give you ideas of what to look for when looking for a backpacking saw. And done. So you can see that's fairly simple, but I think you would agree this is much quicker than the alternative. Does that mean anything to you? It may or may not. So here's one aspect that I like better about the Laplander and how I use it quite often is I can fold this up very quickly and I can slide it right here in my ribs pack. I can always keep it with me when I'm ready to use it. I actually often will leave this little lanyard out so I can just grab it, pull it out, open it, I'm good to go. Now, conversely, I can't do that with the Sawvivor because the Sawvivor, as you probably already guessed, I can put it in the ribs pack, it'll fit barely, but what I have to do is open it up, assemble it, and then use it. So typically what I do with this is once I get to camp and when I need it, I'll open it up, assemble it, use it, and then I'll just leave it open and hang it up somewhere. Now, what I've found in doing that is sometimes when I wander away from camp and I'm looking for firewood, I might forget it, or it's just kind of a pain sometimes because I've got to carry it. where the Laplander just folds up nice, compact. I put it in here. I don't even have to think about it. If I'm out walking around, I'm like, oh, hey, that's a good piece of firewood, I can get it. Now again, it comes at a cost. This is going to perform much quicker for me on those larger pieces of wood. Also with that span, I can get more cutting power in back and forth than I can that Laplander. So the question becomes, which type of saw should you buy? Something with a little more aggressive teeth that folds up like this, or this Laplander where it's got a little more fine set of teeth on it and it's much easier to deploy and then put back into place? Well, that's going to be up to you. What I have found is in the summer, often I don't need to be processing a lot of wood. So this is almost overkill for me. A lot of stuff is just on the ground for the picking and I can take it there. Or if I'm just going out for an overnight, the small amount of wood processing I have to do, this is more than capable of doing it. So actually, as of late, what I've found myself using mostly is this little Laplander. A lot of it has to do with that right there, how easy it is to open and close, and then to be able to store because of its size. So like everything out there, guys, pros and cons. Do I like one better than the other? Not necessarily, but I find for what I do mostly, this will handle that, and some of the things that will take extra energy, I'm okay with it. Now, if I know I'm going to be having a raging fire out in an environment like this time of year, well then I'm probably going to be processing a lot more wood, and maybe those more aggressive teeth with that longer saw span would be more of a benefit. There you go. See ya.